Braam Klopper is the pastor of the Kempton Park East congregation of the Dutch Reformed Church. He is also a pastoral therapist specializing in grief and bereavement. He is the author of 2 publications on bereavement and the narrator of a series of CDs on grief called Conversations on Grief. Furthermore, he is often invited as a guest on a variety of radio programs and is a specialized witness to the Supreme Court on topics such as the rights of parents after the loss of unborn children. On a weekly basis, he hosts a program on Radio Pulpit called Searching the Scriptures. He presents seminars to equip pastors, medical doctors, and other medical professionals, as well as lay members in churches. Most important of all, he is a grandfather of 2 very special grandchildren. We welcome Braam to our conference and are so grateful for his input.
Thank you for the privilege of being able to talk to you today on grief and mourning. Our specific topic is towards a better understanding and support of the bereaved. I'm going to be focusing on the loss of a close relative, such as a child or a spouse or a parent, but take into account that most aspects which I will touch on is applicable to all different losses. Obviously, the loss of a child is universally acknowledged as the most severe, most difficult loss to cope with, and it differs in duration and it differs, obviously, in intensity. I'll be touching on how grief affects people directly. Then we'll have a look at our support as pastors, ministers, and obviously also as other church members and fellow Christians in a church community or congregation. The loss of a loved one is always severe and difficult to cope with. In the first section, I would like to touch on the impact of loss on people. And what I'm going to do is to highlight what is, in my experience, the most significant aspect that we have to take into account when we want to understand how difficult loss can be and why it is so intensely difficult. We live in a time frame and usually in a community where we have an attitude when something goes wrong to try and repair, and if we cannot repair, we fall back onto replace. Whatever goes wrong, our first reaction is, how can this be repaired? And if we realize it cannot be repaired, then we think of replacing. I don't have to mention all the examples of medical replacements we can receive: an ankle replacement, a knee replacement, hip replacement, shoulder, elbow, heart valves, etc., etc., etc. So this is a sort of frame of mind that we are in. We want to repair or replace. Now, death is not the only exception, but it is one of the most important exceptions. When a loved one passes away, we cannot repair and we cannot replace. That leads to helplessness, and therefore I find helplessness being the most important aspect that the bereaved are faced with and battle to cope with. And take into account that helplessness can transmute into anger very often. Anger towards doctors, staff members, family members, pastors even, and even aggression towards God. Anger towards God, which is actually saying that we trust God so much that we believe He could have prevented this. So anger towards God is a very normal reaction during the loss of a loved one. Furthermore, people have a fear of not coping, or reacting in an abnormal manner. I want to make a statement, and that is that mourning in a normal way or in a normal fashion makes people stand out like a sore thumb. Society can be described as almost allergic to people who are mourning. We find it difficult to cope with them. We find it difficult to talk to them. We find it difficult to listen to them. And we react in certain ways, which I will highlight. Society expects people to cope with their loss. Society tries to urge people to see the positive side along the loss. Society encourages people to carry on with life as soon as possible. And they put a lot of pressure on people to feel better. I find that on the bereaved, there's a lot of pressure from the community in general, but also from pastors, fellow Christians, congregation members, as to cope, to feel better, and to continue with life as if nothing had happened. Therefore, some of the most familiar words that are uttered towards the bereaved are, you need to be strong in this time. I'd like to disagree, and I'd like to try and explain to you what someone means or what they are projecting towards you when they say you need to be strong. Actually, it can be translated as, would you please continue as if nothing had happened? Because if you continue as if nothing had happened, I'm comfortable in your presence. But when you're so intensely bereaved, if you're grieving, if you're showing strong emotional outbursts, you're making me feel extremely uncomfortable because I don't know how to handle it, and I don't know how to help you, and I don't know how to make you feel better. So please just be strong. Actually, for my sake, not for your own. Secondly, how can we help? How can we support in a meaningful way? In this second part, I'll be focusing on a few do's and don'ts. Firstly, on the don'ts, because I find that most people do and say the wrong things that are not helpful to the bereaved. And this comes from many years of experience of listening intensely to the bereaved. 40 years of experience in my pastoral work in the congregation, and then another 25 years specializing as a pastoral therapist, focusing and specializing in grief and bereavement. So what I'm sharing with you is what the bereaved tell me, what they experience, what they don't want us to do, what they don't appreciate, what does not help them in their process of grieving and bereavement. The first aspect I'd like to touch on here is, do not confuse loss and the end of suffering, or loss and salvation. Many of us are guilty of this. We think that if a person, a loved one, suffered before their passing, the moment they pass away, the family should actually be relieved and happy. Your father's in a better place. You wouldn't want to exchange places with us. The suffering has come to an end. True words, but that ending of suffering cannot eliminate the loss. We also obviously do it on a faith basis. Jesus Christ was Lord and Savior of your loved one. He or she knew God. They knew Jesus as Savior. They are now with Him. And therefore, you should actually be happy. I repeat, do not confuse loss and the end of suffering or loss and salvation. These things are true at the same time, and the end of suffering and salvation cannot eliminate the loss. And people need to mourn their loss. Let us look at a few typical platitudes that people use. He or she is relieved of their suffering. God picks only the prettiest flowers. He or she is in a better place. They wouldn't want to trade places with us. These things are mostly or all probably true, but it does not bring comfort to the bereaved, and we need to realize this. They're grieving the empty place, the empty space, and they're grieving the loss of future opportunities or part of their own future. My daughter passed away. I will not be able to be there for her matric farewell. I will not be able to be there to walk her down the aisle for a marriage. I will not be able to become a grandparent. When we lose a loved one, we lose part of our own future. This underlines how intense the loss is. Secondly, I'd like to touch on the attempt to minimize the loss. One terrible example. A lady friend shared her condolences with her friend whose daughter passed away, and she said, "Anne, I'm so intensely sorry to hear about the loss of your daughter. But fortunately, you still have 3 children. Another friend of mine lost her only child." Think for a moment, what is this woman saying? She's saying that if you have 4 children and you lose one, it's only a 25% loss. If you have 10 children and one passes away, it will only be a 10% loss. If you have 12 children, you'd hardly notice that one is not there. Every loss is a 100% loss. Never, ever try to comfort by minimizing the loss of the bereaved. Next, please give up on trying to make people feel better, either with tablets or with words or any other way. After the loss of a loved one, it's not the time to feel better. It's a time to be sad. It's a time to mourn. It's time to be honest of how intense this loss is. If you try to make people feel better, you'll experience failure because they will not feel better after your words, even words that was meant well. Your role and purpose when supporting the bereaved is never to make people feel better. Next, I'd like to warn, still under the topic of don'ts, please do not talk on behalf of God. I find that so often pastors and congregation members speak on behalf of God. They actually try even to defend God or rationalize about why this person died, saying things too easily like, it was God's will, or it was his time. These are all topics for an in-depth theological discussion. Is every death God's will? Think of deaths caused by hijackings, motor car accidents, etc., etc., etc. We should be very careful of describing death as God's will, or saying it was his time, it was the time, his line was drawn. That's a theological discussion on its own. What people don't realize is when they speak on behalf of God, they are actually drawing a picture of a caricature of God, describing him as the villain, as the cause of death. Simple words like God needed him can be very upsetting to the bereaved. Someone said to me, what would God need my husband for? I need him. Our 2 little children need him. God has all the angels in heaven at his disposal. What did God need my husband for? And if we think of it, it makes sense, because we do not pray and believe in a God who just needs people and take them away and doesn't care about us who are left behind. So I repeat, we are drawing a caricature of God and drawing him as the villain and cause of death. Let's move on to the positive side of supporting the bereaved, the do's. First on my list is listen, 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 and listen. We talk too much. It's not the time for so much talking. It's time for listening. When you listen, focus on 3 main aspects. Focus on listening to how the person feels. And you can ask this question, please tell me, how do you feel? For them to express how they feel is extremely important. Ask, what are you thinking? No matter how confused the thoughts, it's a good thing to express them. Ask them about the circumstances, but obviously not when it's a suicide and you don't have a close relationship. You have to respect people's privacy as well. But you can ask about the circumstances and where were you when you received this terrible message? Or if you were at his side or her side, what happened in the last hours? What happened in the last days? Listen to the circumstances. And then fourthly, also listen to who was the special person. Ask them, tell me about your child. Tell me about your husband. Who was he? What made him so special? What are the things that you will miss most of this loved one? Give them the opportunity to talk their hearts out. But when you listen, remember to listen without making any corrections. Do not try and defend God. When they say things about God that you know are not true or that you don't agree with, it's not the time to make corrections. Do not try and defend God. And again, do not try and respond in a way that will make them feel better. And never try to give explanations or rationalizations as to why death took place. After listening, the second point I would like to add is to validate their loss. Validate means to give weight to their loss, to acknowledge the death of a loved one is an indescribable loss and is an extremely difficult burden. It's intensely sad. It's a real tragedy. Use words that will acknowledge that something terrible has happened in your life. Something drastic happened in your life, and you have every right to feel the way you do, to think the way you do, to react in the way that you do. Take into account that if the loved one that has passed is a child, the loss is so much more intense. The order of life has been disrupted. Our children are our closest relations. The duration of grief and bereavement after the loss of a child cannot be limited. The intensity is always more than in any other case or in the case of any other loss. I repeat that with the loss of a child, you lose a great deal of your own future. Thirdly, acknowledge the bereaved's reactions as valid and normal. Often use the words normal. When someone reacts hysterically or lethargic or whatever, use the words, but it's normal. Sometimes the intense emotions will come later. But if the intense emotions are there right at the start, that's also normal. Almost everything, especially in the first months of grief and bereavement, are normal. Remember, anger as well. Anger towards God, as I've mentioned. Lethargy, because of shock. Shock is a God-given gift to help get us through the worst parts and the early stages of grief and bereavement. But sometimes people find it very difficult to express how they feel and to express their emotions. All normal. Next, I would like to touch on what people will be going through and need to go through. There's a very well-known model of grief phases. I'm going to mention it because it's well known to many people. But personally, I do not work with this model of grief phases, although it is extremely well known. Grief phases were coined by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and they are denial, anger, bargaining, usually with God, depression, and then acceptance. The reason why I do not use this model is because I feel it's too universal, it's too general. Not everyone will become angry. Not everyone will be in denial. Not everyone will experience depression. And the second reason is it's a too passive model. It sounds as if people will just go through these phases. It will just sort of automatically happen to you. I work with the active model of grief tasks, and I'd like to explain these 5 grief tasks. The first is, of the 5 grief tasks, the reality needs to get through or set in. That happens when we see the body, if possible, of the deceased. If we see a coffin, if we have a funeral or a memorial service, all of those things, when we talk about the events, all of that helps for the reality to get through. This really happened. My loved one has passed away. This cannot be circumvented. We need to go through this, and it takes time. The second grief task, and they do not follow in a strict order. First the first one, then the second, then the third, then the fourth, then the fifth. We can work at these different grief tasks all at the same time. But the second grief task that need to be distinguished is the emotions that accompany loss must be expressed. Once again, people themselves and our society like to try and suppress emotions. Take this tablet. Think of it this way. Feel better. Don't cry. Putting false pressure on people. Your father wouldn't want you to be so sad. He would want you to be happy and continue with your life. That's not the way to do it. The emotions accompanying grief and loss must be expressed, not suppressed. That is healthy and therapeutic. The third grief task, and obviously these grief tasks are a topic on its own and could be a topic for a next seminar. But the third is what I call commemoration. Why and what is commemoration? Well, basically, we need to realize that death can only end the physical existence of the loved one. Death can never end or erase the meaning of one's life. Therefore, we need to commemorate, and we can do this in many different ways. We can have a tombstone. We can have an inscription on a memorial plaque. We could light candles. We can have photos. We can have the favorite meal of the person who passed away on their birthday or in commemoration of them. Remember how much Stefan loved pizza. Let us have pizza and remember Stefan. All just suggestions. There are thousands of suggestions. Use your loved one's birth date or name as a password on your phone or your banking app or whatever. Commemoration. Saying, although you are physically gone, we will remember you and you will always remain part of our lives. The fourth grief task, fortunately, everyone won't have to go through this, but when you need to go through this, it could be extremely difficult. The fourth grief task is conflicting emotions must also be acknowledged and expressed. Sometimes people are intensely sad about the loss, but they may also be angry. In the case of suicide or reckless driving, or not taking care of your health, or whatever the case may be, or for a spouse who treated you badly, you need to go through conflicting emotions. I'm sad, but I could also be relieved that you will never again treat me in such a manner. Share these conflicting emotions with someone that you trust, someone that you can depend on, and where it is emotionally safe for you to share these emotions. You need to go through this, and you need to express these conflicting emotions. The fifth grief task, obviously positive. Loss must be incorporated, and we must live forward. I want to use the example for the fifth grief task, the example of a amputation. If I would be in an accident and my right arm would be amputated, I would have the option of sitting in one place and saying, why did this happen to me? Getting stuck. I would be able to react by saying, now I can't do anything anymore. I can't drive my motor car. I can't make a signature. Or I could decide to make certain adjustments, have my car adjusted so that I can drive with one hand, learn to make a signature with my left hand, etc., etc., etc. But by making all the adjustments, that does not replace my arm. My arm is still amputated. But I'm living forward. I'm incorporating my loss and continuing with my life. This is the essence of the fifth grief task. Our next theme, understanding why the 3-month and 1-year anniversaries are so extremely important. Very often we are involved in people's lives very shortly after their loss, but very often we also have the privilege of being involved over a period of time. Now, round about 3 months, the following might be experienced. The first is that the initial effects of shock are wearing off. The sort of numbness caused by shock is now replaced by intense heartache. I like to use the metaphor of that magical injection that the dentist gives us. When you walk out of the surgery, you have a feeling of numbness, you can't talk properly, etc., but there's no pain. But after about 2 hours, you feel this throbbing and the pain returning. Now, what happens to the bereaved is that with the initial passing of the loved one, there's an enormous amount of shock and chemicals in the body playing a role. But after 3 months, all of this is worked out, that numbness, that sort of protection, and the intense heartache comes to the fore. So being involved in the lives of the bereaved round about the 3-month mark is extremely important and can be extremely satisfying, if I may use the term. The second aspect that plays a role around about the 3-month anniversary is that the reality that death took place can no longer be ignored. This is accompanied by intense longing for the person that becomes real and intense. Now you are confronted with a sadness, but also with intensely longing for the person. If children go and work overseas, then when we miss them after 3 months, we can fly and visit them, or we can make a video call, or we can Zoom or whatever. But if we start longing for the loved one, there's no way that we can make contact. And this makes the sadness more intense. Then, and you will all have experienced this, after 3 months, the support of others has mostly fallen away to a great extent. People are getting on with their lives. And the bereaved tell me that, I can't believe it, but it's only been 3 months. People are continuing with their lives as if this tragedy never happened. They're continuing with their lives as if my child or my husband had never been here. And they find that extremely difficult, while they are so intensely aware of their sadness and of their loss and of their longing. People are just continuing. So this is the ideal time to make contact. I know, and this is not an excuse, that ministers and pastors are often taken up by the next crisis, taken up by the next family who suffers a loss, taken up their time by the next people who need them. And we tend to forget about the people who lost their loved ones 3 months ago and are now going through that period. So make a point of keeping record of these dates. And even if it's just a call, just to call and say, and I realized that today it's been 3 months since Peter's death. How are you? And I don't expect you to be well. Actually, I don't even want to ask how you are, because I can imagine it must be extremely difficult for you at this time. Furthermore, take into account the importance of the 1-year anniversary. Let me explain it this way. In our lives, there are many what we call significant events. Birthdays, wedding anniversaries, Christmas, Old Year's Eve, New Year's, etc., 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 etc. Significant events in the life of persons and families. Now, at the 1-year anniversary of the passing of a loved one, we would have experienced each one of these significant events once without the person. And that is difficult, and it is significant. There would once be, it would have now been his birthday. Today it is my birthday. Today it would have been our wedding anniversary. Christmas, Old Year's, New Year's, obviously significant events and sensitive times. When experiencing those significant events, we will experience that and think of last year. At this time, he was still alive. This is what we did. This is what we shared. This is where we were. And now he's not here. I like to use the metaphor of a jigsaw puzzle. If I would build a jigsaw puzzle consisting of 1,500 pieces, and I'd show it to you proudly, I've built this jigsaw puzzle. But there's one piece missing. What would you realize? What would you see first? No one will say, oh, it's beautiful, there's 1,499 pieces. Everyone will say, there's one piece missing. When we celebrate these significant events, there's the realization of the one piece, the one person that is missing. And that makes it extremely difficult. In closing, I would like to touch on one more topic. I say touch on because this is also a topic that deserves more attention. Men and women usually grieve in a different manner. I know that this is a great generalization, but take into account that men would usually grieve in a more rational way, and women in a more emotional way. If I can give an example, let's just say for instance, that a couple they've lost their son in a motor car accident. Very often we'll find that the husband would want to see the car wreck, go to the scene where the accident took place, get as much information as possible about the circumstances and the accident, etc., etc., etc. A woman's reaction might be that she doesn't want to know anything about that. She doesn't want to see anything of that. And she might use the words, all of that information is not going to bring my child back. So men and women focus on different aspects. And again, men seem to grieve more in a rational way. They think about it. They want to put things into place. Women like emotional experiences. They want to listen to music, light candles, share memories, etc., etc., etc. Something we need to take into account when moving towards a better understanding and support of the bereaved. Lastly, may God use you in a special way to listen to the bereaved, to their stories, their memories, their experience, their grief. And may you find the grace of God to support them in a meaningful manner. God bless.
A big thank you to Braam Klopper for that amazing input. I think many practical insights for all of us, even those of us who have been in ministry for a while. If you want to join in a conversation and be able to respond to some of Braam's points or ask him some questions, we'll be meeting on Wednesday the 24th at 8 o'clock in the evening on an online session. Do come and join us for that conversation. God bless.